The Batman is the film that was released earlier this month. I mean, you guys already know that. But with all the praise that the movie has received, it gave the general audiences a different comic book movie, something way different than the MCU movies that everyone is used to. Interestingly enough, The Batman revealed something very, very crucial about the MCU movies. Something that Marvel producer Kevin Feige is already aware of. Let's talk about that. But before we begin, subscribe to the YouTube channel right there so you don't miss out on the release of our second feature-length film, The Hollywood Dream. It comes out exclusively on this YouTube channel this summer. It's completely free with no ads. Come on, that doesn't sound bad, right? Anyway, back to the video. The Batman revealed to audiences, including people like me, that the MCU movies have become way too much of the same thing. Now hold on, let me be clear. I do believe that the MCU movies have their own genre. Not only are they superhero movies, they are also they go in different genres too. For example, Captain America Winter Soldier, that is more of a spy thriller movie, whereas Ant-Man is more of a comedy heist movie, whereas Spider-Man is more of a coming of age movie. They're not the same movies being done over and over again. A lot of people get that confused. The MCU movies do play with different genres of film, but every one of those MCU movies are shot the same, look the same, have the same type of dialogue and writing, have almost the same type of music, even though with every project, there are different people involved with them. But the producer, Kevin Feige, and the people at Disney/Marvel, they are in control of how they want the movie to be made. And then you take a look at The Batman, where when it comes to filmmaking approach, it looks very, very different from most movies, especially comic book movies. Now, there's another really good Batman movie called The Dark Knight, and that is directed by, the one and only Christopher Nolan. You can compare those two movies. You can definitely tell almost immediately that these are two different movies, two different Batmans, two different styles there. Whereas with the MCU movies, what's different from John Watts and the Russo brothers? You see what I mean? So when it comes to filmmaking approach with the MCU movies, they are all almost completely identical. But each of those MCU movies have different genres that they go into. So it's a little different, but also the same. On top of that, the Batman movie shows how you can mix practical effects with green screen effects with CGI seamlessly and make it feel like it's part of the movie, make it feel realistic. Whereas with MCU movies, it's gotten to the point where it's obviously fake and comic booky. You know what I mean? It's a little too outlandish in that sense. I might be in a minority when it comes to this, but in Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, Iron Man's nanotech suit, yeah, that did not look real to me. 2008 Iron Man movie, the effects on the Iron Man suit in that movie looks way more realistic than it does in Infinity War. Spider-Man No Way Home is another example of this. One of the biggest complaints about that movie is the awful CGI in some of the scenes. For example, when Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man catches Zendaya's character, that CGI did not look that realistic. It just wasn't perfect. I'm not saying it has to be perfect, but it just has to look realistic. And in Spider-Man, it did not look realistic at all. Funny enough, both Black Widow and the Batman have a scene where their main characters gets knocked back by an explosion. And as you can see right here, the one in Black Widow looks way more cheap, way more like a TV movie, whereas the one in the Batman looks way more polished. And it sucks because both of these movies have the same budget, but it's hard to tell when you look at both of them like this. The Black Widow one looks way more cheap compared to the Batman one. And it's just another example of the MCU CGI just not looking that great compared to other movies out there. And that's not a diss towards the people that make Black Widow. I'm sure they put their best efforts into making that movie the best it can be. It just sucks that, the execution wasn't there, you know what I mean? The reliance on setting up sequels. The Batman is a perfect example of having a story that suits the story of the first movie and has Easter eggs for a sequel/spin-off. But at the same time, you watch The Batman and there's no questions that needs to be answered in a different movie. Whereas in the MCU movies, I think Avengers, Age of Ultron, was the worst when it came to this. But Avengers Age of Ultron had a lot of moments where it was relying on sequels or building up sequels, which is pointless. The scene where Wanda was giving nightmares to the Avengers, in that one scene. Thor's scene was pretty much setting up Ragnarok. They stopped the plot to set up a sequel for a different movie and then go back to the main plot. And it makes you wonder, why would you... So you're telling me I have to watch the next movie to understand the plot that you just gave in this movie? So when it comes to these MCU movies, it's just way too reliant on setting up sequels. As if we're not gonna go watch the next MCU movie. It makes zero sense. Don't treat your audience like customers, okay? Technically, we are customers, but at the same time, don't treat us like that. We're just trying to watch a good movie here. Speaking of good movies, The Batman is the perfect example of a movie that has a good mix of that entertainment, fun, as well as it being artistic. Like I said in my last video, the Batman cinematography is one of the best of this year. And on top of that, the movie was entertaining to watch, so it got a mix of both. Usually, when a movie is considered like a classic or like well-made or something, it's typically not also in the category of being a fun blockbuster movie that the general audience likes to see. The Oscars is a perfect example of this kind of mentality where they would only nominate movies that are like critical darlings, you know what I mean? And not like blockbuster audience-friendly type of movies. Not to say like those art house style movies is not loved by the general audiences. It's just that blockbuster entertainment movies that like Hollywood loves to produce, that the general audience loves to go to, those are the movies that don't really get that critical acclaim, you know what I mean? For example, movies like The Lighthouse or Under the Skin or Eraserhead, those are movies that like not a lot of audience members, goes out to see that much. Like, I know for a fact most of my friends, they'd rather watch like an Avengers movie than The Lighthouse. And in terms of like critics and like people in the film world, they praise The Lighthouse more than the Avengers, which is understandable because The Lighthouse is more artistic, is more of that creative choices and creative risks and like experimenting and all that good stuff. So with The Batman, they did a good job of mixing the two because from the filmmaking side of it, it is a well-made movie. It has some creative, cool shots. It has some great music, by the way. It has some great storytelling, amazing acting and all that. It also has some creative choices that Matt Reeves himself put into the movie. And on top of that, it is a fun, entertaining movie. So, in a sense, The Batman is like the Nick Fury of the filmmaking world in Hollywood, where the general audiences and people that love filmmaking and the critics came together to watch this movie and everyone loving it. With all that being said, Kevin Feige knows this. The producer of these Marvel movies, Kevin Feige, he is well aware of the state of the MCU and how the movies are now becoming a little too generic, way too much in the formula of the MCU, and there's going to be a change. There seems to be a big change coming. For example, the new Doctor Strange movie is directed by Sam Raimi, and it looks like a Sam Raimi movie, which is great to see. If you don't know who Sam Raimi is, he directed the original Spider-Man movies. He's really good at making horror movies, and he has that trademark camera style, and he's implementing all of that in that Doctor Strange movie. And by the looks of the trailer, it does look like a very different MCU movie. It is the first MCU movie to be more horror-driven, which makes sense because Sam Raimi is directing it. But yeah, it seems like a movie that is breaking the Marvel MCU filmmaking approach. And also, like last year, we had WandaVision, which was a very different MCU project. It was very experimental. If you make movies, you can appreciate the style that they went with each episode, taking place in a different decade and filming it as if it was made in that decade. I personally love that. I love those tiny details. And WandaVision, just like I'm hoping with Doctor Strange, will start giving directors and people behind the project that's actually physically making the movie have more creative freedom with the projects that they're signed on. Because take a look at The Batman. It is a Matt Reeves movie and is also a Batman movie. Now, keep in mind, I am not dissing the MCU movies. I love the MCU movies. And I also love the Batman movie. You can love both. Why pick and choose? You can love both. That's what it's all about. See you guys in the next video. Have a nice day.
You are watching